The crimson sands of their Axis Minor howled with perpetual winds that could strip paint from starship hulls. Garrett Thorne wiped sweat from his weathered brow, squinting against the twin suns that beat down mercilessly on the abandoned salvage yard. At 57, his body still remembered the rhythm of hard work, even if his joints protested more these days. The fusion welder in his calloused hand sparked and hissed as he sealed another crack in the hull of his aging cargo freighter, the Wandering Star. This desolate planet served as his refuge, a place where questions were scarce and solitude was abundant. Garrett had purchased the old salvage yard for almost nothing 15 years ago, after the mining corporations abandoned the system. Most days, he worked alone among the skeletal remains of forgotten spacecraft, occasionally trading salvaged parts with passing merchants who needed repairs far from the prying eyes of authorities. The sound that interrupted his work was unlike anything natural to this barren world. A deep, resonant cry echoed across the canyon, followed by the unmistakable crash of something massive hitting the ground. Garrett killed the welder's power and listened intently. Another crash, closer this time, accompanied by a sound that resembled labored breathing magnified 100-fold. His first instinct was to retreat inside the reinforced shelter he called home. 40 years of surviving in the frontier territories had taught him that curiosity often led to complications. Yet something about that sound carried an undertone of distress that tugged at memories he usually kept buried. Against his better judgment, Garrett grabbed his plasma rifle and made his way toward the source of the disturbance. What he discovered beyond the ridge of rusted ship parts defied his expectations entirely. A draconian female lay sprawled across the sand, her massive form creating a crater where she had fallen. But this was no ordinary dragon person. Her scales shimmered with an otherworldly quality, shifting between deep azure and violet depending on how the light struck them. Intricate patterns of gold traced along her spine and wings, markings that Garrett recognized from old data files as royal insignia. She was enormous, easily 7 meters from snout to tail, with wings that even folded looked capable of spanning 15 meters or more. Her breathing came in ragged gasps, each exhale sending small clouds of frost into the superheated air, an odd contrast that spoke of her biology struggling against this environment. Dark purple blood seeped from multiple wounds across her body, the most severe being a deep gash along her left flank that looked suspiciously like damage from military-grade plasma weapons. Garrett approached cautiously, keeping his rifle lowered but ready. Dragons were known for their pride and their power. Even wounded, she could end his life with a single swipe of those talons, each one as long as his forearm. Her massive head turned toward him as he drew near, revealing eyes that swirled with colors he had no names for, a mixture of silver, gold, and deep amber that seemed to contain entire galaxies. Those eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel transparent, as if she could see straight through to his core. For a long moment, neither moved. Then, to his complete surprise, she spoke in perfect universal standard, her voice a melodious rumble despite her obvious pain. "Human. I mean you no harm." The words came slowly, carefully, as if each one cost her considerable effort. "Though I understand if you flee. My kind and yours have little reason for trust." Garrett lowered his rifle completely, a decision that probably qualified him for the Fool's Hall of Fame, but something in her tone convinced him of her sincerity. "You're hurt badly." "What happened?" "Ambush. Traitors within my own court." She managed a bitter laugh that sent more frost crystals into the air. "They knew the route of my diplomatic mission. Attacked my escort ships as we passed through the neutral corridor. I am Seraphina of House Dawnfire, third princess of the Celestial Dominion, and apparently now a fugitive in my own realm." The name sent a jolt through Garrett's memory. The Celestial Dominion was the largest and most powerful draconian empire, spanning 12 systems. Their princesses were legendary not just for their size and power, but for their combat prowess and political acumen. This changed everything. Harboring a dragon princess, especially one accused of crimes by her own people, could bring down more trouble than he had ever imagined. "Those wounds need treatment," he heard himself saying, logic and self-preservation taking a back seat to something he thought had died in him decades ago. "Compassion. My medical equipment isn't designed for your physiology, but I have universal trauma kits. They should at least stabilize you. Serafina studied him with those mesmerizing eyes. Why would you help me? Your people and mine have been at odds for generations. The border wars alone claimed thousands of human lives. Because 30 years ago, I was lying in the dirt bleeding out on Kessler 4 after my transport was shot down. Garrett's voice grew distant with memory. A draconian patrol found me. They had every reason to leave me to die. We were enemies then. But their medic, a young male with green scales whose name I never learned, spent 2 hours keeping me alive until human rescue arrived. He saved my life, knowing it might cost him his commission. I figure I owe your species a debt. Something shifted in Serafina's expression, a softening around her eyes despite the pain. The universe rarely rewards such kindness. You know this will complicate your life immeasurably. Lady, my life got complicated the moment I decided to become a hermit on a dead planet. A little more chaos won't kill me. He managed a wry smile. Probably. With considerable effort and Garrett's guidance, Serafina managed to drag herself toward his workshop, leaving a trail in the crimson sand. His facility was too small for her to enter fully, but the large cargo bay provided enough shelter from the brutal suns. As he worked on her wounds with the trauma kits, spraying synthetic tissue sealant and broad-spectrum antibiotics designed for cross-species compatibility, he learned pieces of her story. The coup attempt was orchestrated by her eldest brother, Mordrath, who sought to seize the throne ahead of their father's planned abdication. Serafina had discovered evidence of his alliance with the Void Syndicate, a criminal organization that trafficked in forbidden weapons technology. Before she could present proof to the royal court, assassins struck. Her entire diplomatic escort was wiped out, 30 loyal warriors dead in minutes. They will come looking for me, Serafina warned as he finished sealing the worst of her wounds. Mordrath cannot afford to let me live. I know too much. If they trace me here, you will be caught in the crossfire. Garrett cleaned his tools methodically, considering his options. The smart move would be to get her patched up and send her on her way. But looking at this magnificent being, a princess who carried herself with dignity even while bleeding and exhausted, he knew he couldn't do that. She needed time to heal, and time was the one thing he could provide out here in this forgotten corner of space. Then we make sure they don't find you, he said simply. I've got hidden compartments in this facility that even deep scanners can't penetrate. Old smuggler's tricks. You rest, heal, and we figure out your next move together. You are either remarkably brave or spectacularly foolish, Garrett Thorne. Despite her words, gratitude shone in those swirling eyes. I've been called both plenty of times. He set out containers of water and what food supplies he had that might work for draconian biology. Get some rest, princess. Something tells me we're both going to need our strength for what comes next. As Serafina's breathing finally steadied into something resembling peaceful sleep, Garrett stood at the entrance of his workshop, watching the sun set over the crimson dunes. He had spent 15 years avoiding entanglements, keeping his head down, staying invisible. Now he had a dragon princess sleeping in his cargo bay and assassins potentially hunting their way across the sector. The old soldier in him recognized the feeling stirring in his chest. It was not fear, though perhaps it should have been. It was purpose. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Garrett Thorne had something worth fighting for again. 3 days passed in tense vigilance. Garrett modified his sensor arrays to provide advanced warning of any approaching ships, while Serafina's remarkable constitution began knitting her wounds closed at a pace that would have amazed human doctors. During those days of recovery, an unexpected friendship began forming in that unlikely refuge. Serafina proved to be far different from the proud, aloof dragons Garrett had encountered during his military service. She possessed a sharp wit and genuine curiosity about human culture that surprised him. In turn, he found himself fascinated by her stories of the Celestial Dominion, a realm of floating crystal cities and ancient traditions that stretched back millennia. Your species surprises me, Serafina admitted on the 4th morning as Garrett prepared breakfast. She had regained enough strength to move around the cargo bay, though flying remained beyond her capabilities. I was taught that humans were aggressive, short-lived creatures driven primarily by greed and territorial ambition. Yet you risk everything to shelter me, expecting nothing in return. Garrett chuckled while mixing protein paste into something vaguely resembling eggs. We're a complicated bunch. Yeah, there are plenty of greedy, aggressive humans. But there are also those of us who remember what it means to stand by your principles, even when it's inconvenient. Principles are a luxury few can afford in times of war. Her tone carried the weight of hard experience. I have watched planets burn over matters of principle. Sometimes I wonder if flexibility might serve better than rigid honor. Flexibility is just another word for compromise, and some things shouldn't be compromised. He handed her a large container filled with high-protein nutrient bars he had synthesized specifically for her metabolism. Your brother's alliance with the Void Syndicate, that's one of those things. Those criminals deal in weapons that violate every interstellar treaty. Stop them now, or watch the whole sector descend into chaos. Serafina regarded him thoughtfully while consuming the nutrient bars with surprising delicacy for a creature with such massive jaws. You sound like a soldier. Were you military? Another lifetime ago. I served in the Terran Defense Forces during the frontier conflicts. 20 years of my life dedicated to protecting colonies that barely remembered my name once the fighting stopped. Old bitterness crept into his voice. I learned that governments make promises they don't keep and heroes are only useful when there's a war to fight. After mustering out, I came here to find peace. Peace is precious, Serafina agreed softly. I fear I have stolen yours by bringing danger to your doorstep. Perhaps I should leave before Mordratha's hunters arrive. You're not healed enough for extended flight, and we both know it. Besides, Garrett met her eyes steadily, I made my choice when I decided to help you. No taking it back now. Their conversation was interrupted by a sharp beeping from the sensor console. Garrett's expression darkened as he studied the readouts. 3 ships had just entered the system, broadcasting Celestial Dominion military codes but following search patterns that suggested hostile intent. They found me. Serafina's voice remained calm, but her scales shifted to darker hues, a sign of distress Garrett had learned to recognize. You should activate whatever distress beacon you possess. Claim I took you hostage. There might still be time to save yourself. Not happening. Garrett was already moving, pulling up hidden panels and extracting weapons he had sworn never to use again. Military-grade plasma rifles, EMP grenades, and a personal shield generator that had cost him 3 months' earnings years ago. Those hidden compartments I mentioned? Time to use them. Can you still breathe fire despite your injuries? My flame sacs remain functional, though sustained combat would reopen my wounds. She watched him arm himself with practiced efficiency. Garrett, 3 warships against 1 human and a wounded dragon. These are not favorable odds. I've beaten worse odds. Barely, but I did. He activated the facility's defense grid, old but still functional turrets rising from concealed positions throughout the salvage yard. Those ships are smaller attack corvettes based on their signatures. Fast, but not heavily armored. If we play this smart and use the terrain, we might discourage them enough to make them reconsider their life choices. Despite the dire circumstances, Serafina found herself feeling something she had rarely experienced. Hope mixed with admiration. This human who owed her nothing was preparing to fight impossible odds to protect her. It stirred something deep in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with her natural fire. Very well, Garrett Thorne. If we stand together, then let us give Mordratha's assassins a battle they will remember. Her eyes blazed with renewed determination. Guide me to your hidden positions. I may be wounded, but I am still a princess of the Dawnfire bloodline. They will learn the cost of hunting me. The first corvette descended through the atmosphere within the hour, its weapon system scanning methodically. Garrett watched from a concealed position while Serafina hid in a reinforced bunker beneath the main workshop, ready to emerge when needed. He had spent years preparing this facility with defensive measures that most people would consider paranoid. Today, that paranoia would either save them or merely delay the inevitable. When the Corvette scanners swept past the workshop without detecting Serafina's biosignature, Garrett allowed himself a small smile. The shielding worked. But the attackers were not fools. They began deploying ground troops, 24 armored soldiers spreading out in professional search patterns. These were not regular Dominion military. Garrett recognized mercenary equipment and tactics. Mordrath was using deniable assets, soldiers who could not be traced back to him officially. That told him something important. The prince was not confident enough in his coup to use official forces openly. Serafina's evidence must be even more damaging than she had revealed. The first mercenary made the mistake of approaching the workshop entrance where Garrett had placed proximity mines salvaged from old military stocks. The explosion sent 3 soldiers flying, their armor saving their lives but taking them out of the fight. The others scattered, taking cover and returning fire at Garrett's position. Plasma bolts seared through the air, superheating sand into glass where they struck. Garrett returned fire methodically, each shot carefully aimed to conserve ammunition. He was outnumbered but had the advantage of knowing every piece of cover in his salvage yard. Years of arranging wreckage into specific patterns now paid dividends as he led the mercenaries into kill zones covered by his automated turrets, but numbers told. For every soldier he incapacitated, 2 more advanced. They were pushing him back toward the workshop, exactly where he did not want them to be. If they reached Serafina before she was ready, if they brought heavier weapons to bear on the bunker, it would all be over. That was when the Princess of House Dawnfire decided she had waited long enough. The bunker door exploded outward with a roar that shook the ground. Serafina emerged in a blast of sapphire flame, her wings spread wide despite the pain it caused her. She was magnificent and terrible in equal measure, a vision of draconic fury that froze the mercenaries in their tracks for a fatal instant. Her breath weapon, superheated plasma generated by biological processes humans could barely understand, washed over the nearest squad. Their armor held for approximately 2 seconds before beginning to slag. The survivors scattered, shouting warnings into their communications, but Serafina was already among them. One massive claw swept aside a soldier's plasma rifle as if it were a toy. Her tail, moving with whip-like speed, knocked another 3 fighters sprawling. Garrett used the distraction to advance, taking up position where he could cover her flanks. Together, they fought with an unconscious coordination that surprised them both. When Serafina engaged close combat fighters, Garrett eliminated the ranged attackers trying to flank her. When plasma fire forced him into cover, she created barriers of flame that gave him time to relocate. The mercenaries began a fighting retreat toward their corvette, their professional discipline crumbling in the face of unexpected resistance. But their commander made one final desperate play. From the corvette's cargo bay descended a mech suit, a 4-meter-tall combat walker bristling with weapons. "Take cover." Serafina's shout came too late. The mech's main cannon, a heavy plasma accelerator, fired directly at Garrett. Time seemed to slow as he saw the bolt of energy rushing toward him, knowing his personal shield could never absorb that much power. Then Serafina was there, her wing wrapping around him as she turned her back to the blast. The plasma bolt struck her directly between the shoulder blades, burning through scales and tissue. She roared in pain but held her position, sheltering Garrett with her own body. Something broke inside him at that moment. This being, this princess he had known for mere days, had just taken a potentially fatal blow meant for him. Rage and fear combined into a cold clarity. He emerged from behind her wing, plasma rifle set to maximum overcharge, knowing it would destroy the weapon after one shot but not caring. The bolt he fired was not the standard plasma burst. It was a contained star, an unstable packet of energy that his modified rifle could barely contain. It struck the mech's cockpit dead center, and the machine collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The remaining mercenaries fled to their corvette, which lifted off with emergency thrust, not even waiting to retrieve their fallen comrades. The other 2 corvettes, seeing the carnage below and apparently deciding their pay was not worth facing a dragon princess and a suicidally determined human, broke orbit without even attempting to land. In the sudden silence after battle, Garrett rushed to Seraphina's side. She had collapsed, the wound on her back smoking and raw. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, and her scales had turned ashen, a sign of critical distress. "Why?" The word came out barely above a whisper. "Why did you do that?" Seraphina's swirling eyes fixed on his, and even in pain, they held warmth. "Because you stood for me when you had every reason to walk away. Because in 3 days, you showed me more honor than I have seen in some who have served my family for years. Because, Garrett Thorne, in this short time, you have become precious to me." Garrett worked frantically with his medical supplies, spraying synthetic tissue over the burn, administering every painkiller and healing agent he possessed. "You are not dying on me, princess. Not after pulling a fool stunt like that. You hear me? We are going to fix this." So commanding, she managed a weak laugh. "Perhaps you should have been born a dragon. You have the temperament for it." As he worked to stabilize her, neither noticed the ship descending from high orbit, this one broadcasting no hostile intent. It was a human medical frigate, responding to an automated distress signal Garrett's defense systems had sent out during the battle. He had forgotten about that failsafe, installed years ago in case of emergency. The doctor who disembarked was a woman named Helena Cross, a xenobiologist specializing in cross-species medicine. She took one look at Seraphina and got to work with equipment far more sophisticated than anything Garrett possessed. For 6 hours, they worked together to save the princess's life, human ingenuity and draconian resilience combining to pull her back from the edge. When Seraphina finally stabilized, sleeping peacefully under sedation, Dr. Cross pulled Garrett aside. "She will live, but recovery will take weeks. She is asking about you even in her sedated state. That is unusual. Dragons are not known for forming attachments to other species." Garrett looked back at the sleeping princess, his chest tight with emotions he thought had died years ago. "She saved my life. Took a shot meant for me. How am I supposed to walk away from that?" "I do not think you want to walk away." Helena's knowing smile suggested she saw more than he was ready to admit. "The question is, what happens when she is healed? A dragon princess and a human salvager. It is not exactly a conventional pairing." "Nothing about this has been conventional from the start," Garrett replied, but his eyes never left Seraphina's sleeping form. Somewhere between that first act of kindness and standing together in battle, something profound had shifted between them. What began as a debt of honor had transformed into something neither had anticipated. As twin sun set over their axis minor once again, Garrett settled into a chair beside Seraphina's recovery bed, ready to stand watch through the night. Whatever came next, whatever complications their unlikely bond might bring, he knew with absolute certainty that he would face it at her side. The dawn broke differently over their axis minor on the 15th day after the battle. Seraphina stood at full height for the first time since her injury, testing her wings with careful movements. The wound on her back had healed to a silver scar that would mark her scales forever, a permanent reminder of the day a human had been worth dying for. Garrett watched from the workshop entrance, his feelings a complicated tangle he was still trying to understand. Over 2 weeks of recovery, they had shared countless conversations, revealing pieces of themselves neither had shown anyone in years. He learned of her loneliness in the royal court, surrounded by schemers and sycophants but precious few true friends. She discovered his past as not just a soldier but a widower who had lost his family to a pirate raid 10 years ago, the event that drove him to this isolated existence. "You are staring," Seraphina observed without turning around, amusement coloring her tone. Dragons possessed exceptional peripheral vision. "Just making sure you are not going to collapse again. You are a terrible patient, constantly trying to do too much too soon." His concern was genuine, though wrapped in his usual gruff delivery. She turned to face him, and the morning light caught her scales in a way that made his breath catch. "I heal quickly when properly motivated. Besides, I cannot remain hidden here forever. Mordrath will send more hunters, and next time they will come in greater force. Let them come. We will deal with them. Garrett had spent the past weeks reinforcing his defenses, turning the salvage yard into a proper fortress with Dr. Cross's help. The medical frigate had remained in orbit, Helena fascinated by the developing bond between human and dragon. You speak as if this is your fight. Serafina moved closer, and he had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. I have brought nothing but danger to your peaceful existence. Peace is overrated, he countered. And for the record, Princess, the moment you took that plasma bolt for me, your fight became my fight. That is not how this works. You do not get to sacrifice yourself for someone and then act like they owe you nothing in return. That is not how debts of honor work in any culture I know, she replied, but her eyes held warmth that contradicted her formal tone. Then maybe we are making up new rules. Garrett reached up, placing his hand against her massive forearm, human skin against dragon scales. You said I have become precious to you. That feeling is mutual, Serafina. What we have here, whatever this is, it matters to me. More than I thought anything could matter again. The princess lowered her head until they were nearly eye to eye, a position of vulnerability and trust for a dragon. My people have legends of bonds that transcend species, connections of soul rather than form. I thought them mere stories until I met a stubborn human who fights like a warrior and protects like a guardian. Garrett Thorne, you have done something I believed impossible. You have made me hope again. The moment stretched between them, profound and fragile. Then the proximity alarms shattered it. But this time, the readings were different. Not 3 ships but dozens. Garrett's face went pale as he studied the sensor data streaming across his console. 38 warships had just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, all broadcasting Celestial Dominion military codes. They sent a fleet, Serafina breathed, her scales darkening with distress. Mordrath is making his final move. He means to destroy all evidence of my survival. But as the ships drew closer, something unexpected became clear. They were not deploying in attack formation. Instead, they arranged themselves in a ceremonial pattern, and a single shuttle detached from the flagship, descending peacefully toward the planet's surface. That is the royal standard, Serafina's voice filled with disbelief. My father's personal guard. But how? The answer came as the shuttle landed 50 meters from the workshop and its ramp descended. What emerged was a sight that would have seemed impossible days before. 378 draconian warriors, each one armored in the ceremonial plate of the Dominion's elite forces, filed out in perfect formation. They represented every house in the realm, scales of every color forming a rainbow of military might. At their head walked a massive dragon who could only be Serafina's father, High King Draconis himself. His scales were deep crimson edged with gold, and his presence radiated authority that made even Garrett want to bow. Behind him came another figure that made Serafina gasp. Princess Nyx, her younger sister, whose intelligence network was legendary throughout the Dominion. You thought I would not notice an assassination attempt against my own daughter? King Draconis' voice carried across the sand like rolling thunder. You thought Mordrath's treason would remain hidden? Foolish child, give your father some credit. Nyx stepped forward, her green scales glinting with satisfaction. I have been tracking Mordrath's conspiracy for months, big sister. But we needed proof that would satisfy the noble houses. When you disappeared, I feared the worst. Then 3 days ago, mercenaries began boasting in certain establishments about how they barely escaped a wounded princess and her insane human protector. That provided the trail we needed. The king's eyes, similar to his daughter's but holding centuries of accumulated wisdom, fixed on Garrett. The human met that gaze steadily, refusing to show the fear that any sane being should feel. So this is the human who has sheltered my daughter. The one who stood against trained killers and military hardware to protect her. Step forward, Garrett Thorne. Garrett walked out to meet the king, aware that 378 warriors watched his every movement. He stopped an appropriate distance away and inclined his head respectfully but did not bow. He had bowed to enough authorities in his life. If the king wanted to kill him for insufficient deference, so be it. To his surprise, King Draconis laughed, a sound like avalanches. "Nix, you were correct. He possesses the spine of a dragon despite his human form. Tell me, Garrett Thorne, why did you risk everything for my daughter? Surely you knew the danger." "With respect, Your Majesty, anyone with functioning eyes could see she needed help. I am not in the habit of leaving people to die when I can do something about it." Garrett kept his tone level and respectful but honest. "As for the danger, I am old enough to know that everything worth doing carries risk. She was worth the risk." Something passed through the king's eyes at those words. He turned to his daughter, who had emerged from the workshop and now stood beside Garrett in a gesture of unity that did not go unnoticed. "Seraphina, your sister tells me you were wounded protecting this human from a mech cannon blast. Is this true?" "It is, father. He had already saved my life multiple times. Returning the favor seemed appropriate." Her tone remained formal, but she moved fractionally closer to Garrett. "I will not apologize for my actions." "I would not expect you to," the king replied. "A Dawnfire who abandons an ally is no Dawnfire at all. That is one lesson you have clearly taken to heart." He looked between them, and his ancient eyes saw what perhaps even they had not fully acknowledged. "You have formed a bond, the two of you. I can see it in how you stand together, how you speak of each other." Garrett and Seraphina exchanged glances, something unspoken passing between them. "Yes," Seraphina said simply. "We have." King Draconis was silent for a long moment. Cross-species relationships were not unheard of in the Dominion, but they were uncommon, and one involving a princess would complicate matters of succession and politics. Yet as he studied the human who had risked everything for his daughter and the fierce determination in Seraphina's eyes, he recognized something he had not seen in his family for far too long. Genuine connection based on mutual respect and shared sacrifice. "Very well," he declared, his voice carrying to all assembled. "Let it be known throughout the Dominion that Garrett Thorne is hereby declared a friend of House Dawnfire, with all rights and protections that title carries. Any who raise weapons against him raise them against me." The assembled warriors struck their chests in unison, a sound like thunder. But the king was not finished. He approached Garrett directly, lowering his massive head in a gesture of respect that shocked everyone present. "You saved my daughter's life and asked nothing in return. You stood beside her in battle when trained soldiers fled. You are small in stature, human, but your spirit rivals any dragon I have known. My family is in your debt." Garrett felt his throat tighten with unexpected emotion. "I need no debt or title, Your Majesty. Having the privilege of knowing your daughter is payment enough. Nevertheless, you shall have both." Additionally, the king's eyes glinted with something that might have been mischief. "Should you wish to formalize this bond you share with my daughter in the ways of either human or dragon custom, you have my blessing." It is past time the Dominion opened itself to new possibilities. The implications of those words sent ripples through the assembled warriors, but Seraphina's sharp gasp and the sudden brightness of her scales told Garrett everything he needed to know about her feelings on the matter. He looked up at her, this magnificent being who had changed his life in a handful of days, and felt a smile tugging at his weathered features. "That is a conversation for later," he said diplomatically, though his hand found hers, human fingers intertwining with dragon talons in a gesture that transcended species. "First, I believe there is the small matter of dealing with Prince Mordrath and his treachery." "Indeed," King Draconis agreed. "Which is why I have brought sufficient forces to arrest my son and dismantle his conspiracy. The evidence Seraphina gathered, combined with what Nyx has uncovered, will see justice served. The Void Syndicate will find the Dominion a less welcoming place going forward." Princess Nyx approached Garrett with open curiosity. "I must admit, I am fascinated by you, human. My sister is not easily impressed, yet she speaks of you as if you hung the stars themselves. Perhaps you might share your secrets over proper food and drink? This salvage yard, while defensible, lacks certain amenities. Before Garrett could respond, Serafina interjected with surprising protectiveness. Nix, if you attempt to interrogate him with your intelligence officer tactics, we will have words. Overprotective already, Nix's laugh was musical. This will be entertaining to watch develop. As the royal party prepared to depart, taking Serafina and Garrett with them to the flagship, King Draconis pulled his daughter aside. Are you certain of this path, child? The complications it will bring are not insignificant. Serafina looked back at Garrett, who was being enthusiastically questioned by several younger warriors about his battle tactics. When the assassins came, father, he did not hesitate. When I fell wounded, he sheltered me without thought for his own safety. When I took that blast for him, he looked at me as if I hung the stars themselves, to borrow Nix's phrase. Yes, I am certain. For the first time in my life, I am absolutely certain of something beyond duty and obligation. The king nodded slowly. Then you have my full support. Let the noble houses gossip. A king who cannot support his daughter's happiness is no king at all. Besides, his eyes gleamed, it will be refreshing to have someone in the family who is not afraid to speak their mind. I suspect this Garrett Thorne will keep you appropriately humble. As the ships prepared to leave their Axis Minor behind, Garrett stood on the flagship's observation deck beside Serafina, watching his salvage yard grow smaller below. You know this is insane, right? A salvager and a princess. People are going to think we have both lost our minds. Perhaps we have, Serafina replied, her wing gently encircling him. But I find I do not care what others think. You taught me something important, Garrett Thorne. You taught me that honor and courage are not defined by species or station, but by the choices we make when everything is at stake. You chose to stand beside me. Now I choose to stand beside you, whatever comes next. 378 warriors had come to their door, but they had not come as enemies. They had come as witnesses to something remarkable, a bond that transcended the boundaries both political and biological. As the fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, carrying them toward a future neither could have imagined weeks before, Garrett realized something profound. He had spent 15 years hiding from the universe on a dead planet. It took a wounded dragon princess falling from the sky to teach him that sometimes the universe had other plans, and sometimes those plans were worth embracing. So, he asked with a slight smile, what exactly does one wear to a royal court when they are dating a princess? I am assuming oil-stained work clothes are probably not appropriate. Serafina's laughter filled the observation deck, warm and genuine. We will figure it out together. Besides, I suspect my father will enjoy watching the noble houses scramble to cope with having a human in the family. Consider it your first official duty as friend of House Dawnfire. 'Cause appropriate chaos. Now that, Garrett grinned, I can definitely handle. Below them, their Axis Minor grew distant, a lonely planet that had sheltered a friendship that would reshape the understanding between two species. In the days ahead, there would be challenges, political maneuvering, and more than a few raised eyebrows from those who could not comprehend their bond. But standing together, human and dragon, salvager and princess, they would face it all with the same courage that had brought them together in the first place. Sometimes, the greatest adventures began with a simple act of kindness to a stranger in need. And sometimes, those adventures led to love that transcended all boundaries.